Geneva appears deceptively peaceful today, with its pristine lake reflecting the snow-capped Alps and elegant boulevards lined with international organizations. But look beyond the diplomatic facades, and you'll discover a city that has witnessed some of the most pivotal moments in human history. Tonight we'll explore how this modest Swiss city became the unlikely epicenter of global diplomacy, shaping treaties that ended wars, establishing institutions that govern our modern world, and hosting negotiations that quite literally changed the course of civilization. From medieval trade disputes to nuclear disarmament talks, Geneva has survived religious wars, political upheavals, and world conflicts to emerge as humanity's most trusted neutral ground. We'll start with a surprising discovery beneath the city's famous Jet d'eau, and from there, we'll follow Geneva's extraordinary transformation from a small lakeside settlement into the diplomatic capital of the world. So just relax and let your mind drift as we explore the remarkable story of Geneva, where handshakes have prevented wars and signatures have saved millions of lives. When you think of Geneva, perhaps you picture the United Nations building with its flags from every nation on Earth, or maybe the elegant lakefront where world leaders stroll between high-stakes negotiations. This city feels like it was destined for diplomacy, where every conversation could potentially reshape international relations. And indeed, for centuries, Geneva has been the place where the world comes to make peace. But the story of how this happened is far more complex and fascinating than you might imagine. The area we now know as Geneva has been inhabited for thousands of years, but it was only officially mentioned by name in the 1st century BCE. The Romans called it Geneva, and even then, it occupied a strategically important position. Situated where the Rhone River flows out of Lake Geneva, the location offered natural advantages that would prove crucial throughout history. The Romans recognized this immediately, establishing a settlement that could control both water and land routes between northern and southern Europe. But Geneva's true significance wouldn't emerge for many centuries. During the Roman period, it was simply one of many settlements scattered across what would eventually become Switzerland. The real transformation began much later, when religious and political forces converged to create something unprecedented in European history. In the early medieval period, Geneva found itself at the crossroads of competing powers. The Holy Roman Empire claimed authority over the region, while the Kingdom of Burgundy also asserted control. This constant struggle between different rulers would actually become Geneva's greatest strength, forcing the city to develop sophisticated diplomatic skills just to survive. Local leaders learned to navigate between competing interests, playing one power against another while maintaining their own autonomy. By the 11th century, Geneva had become an episcopal city, ruled by prince-bishops who wielded both religious and temporal authority. These ecclesiastical rulers turned Geneva into a significant religious centre, but more importantly, they established the city's reputation as a place where different factions could meet on neutral ground. The prince-bishops often served as mediators in regional disputes, and their palace became a venue for negotiations between warring nobles. The 12th and 13th centuries saw Geneva's influence expand dramatically. The city's location made it a natural stopping point for merchants travelling between Italy and Northern Europe, and this commercial activity brought wealth and international connections. More significantly, it brought diverse groups of people who needed a safe, neutral place to conduct business and resolve disputes. During this period, Geneva developed what we might recognise today as the first international arbitration system. Merchants from different regions would bring their trade disputes to Geneva's courts, knowing that the city's rulers had a vested interest in maintaining neutrality. A merchant from Venice could expect fair treatment alongside a trader from Flanders, because Geneva's prosperity depended on maintaining its reputation for impartiality. The city's growing reputation for neutrality caught the attention of European rulers, who began to see Geneva as an ideal location for diplomatic meetings. In 1273, the future Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf I met with representatives from various Alpine regions in Geneva to negotiate territorial agreements. This was one of the first recorded instances of Geneva being chosen specifically for its neutral status rather than its military or economic power. The 14th century brought new challenges and opportunities. The Black Death devastated much of Europe, but Geneva's position allowed it to recover more quickly than many other cities. More importantly, the plague years demonstrated the need for international cooperation in addressing shared threats, and Geneva emerged as a natural coordinating centre for such efforts. During the same period, the Great Schism divided the Catholic Church, with rival popes claiming authority from different cities. Geneva's prince-bishops found themselves in the delicate position of maintaining relations with multiple claimants while avoiding taking sides. This experience further refined the city's diplomatic traditions and established precedents for handling complex international crises. The 15th century marked a turning point in Geneva's development as a diplomatic centre. The city began hosting regular assemblies where representatives from across Europe would gather to discuss trade regulations, territorial disputes, and religious matters. These assemblies weren't formal international conferences in the modern sense, but they established many of the protocols and traditions that would later characterize international diplomacy. One particularly significant event occurred in 1444 when Geneva hosted negotiations between the Holy Roman Empire and France regarding territorial claims in the region. The talks lasted for several months and involved not just the primary parties but also representatives from numerous smaller states and city-states. The final agreement, known as the Treaty of Geneva, established principles for resolving territorial disputes through negotiation rather than warfare. What made this treaty remarkable wasn't just its content, but the process by which it was negotiated. Geneva's authorities established detailed protocols for the talks, including rules for diplomatic immunity, procedures for secret negotiations, and mechanisms for ensuring that all parties had equal access to information. These innovations would later influence diplomatic practices across Europe. The early 16th century brought religious upheaval that would transform Geneva's character entirely. The Protestant Reformation reached the city in the 1520s, and by 1541, John Calvin had established Geneva as a major centre of Reformed Christianity. This religious transformation might have been expected to end Geneva's role as a neutral diplomatic venue, but instead it enhanced the city's international significance. Calvin's Geneva attracted religious refugees from across Europe, creating a truly international community united by faith rather than nationality. These refugees included many highly educated individuals who brought valuable skills and international connections. More importantly, they reinforced Geneva's tradition of providing sanctuary for those fleeing persecution, a role that would prove crucial to the city's later diplomatic development. The religious character of Calvin's Geneva also established new principles of international law that would influence diplomatic practice for centuries. Calvin and his followers argued that legitimate government required the consent of the governed, and that rulers who violated fundamental rights could be legitimately resisted. These ideas, radical for their time, would eventually influence concepts of sovereignty and international intervention that remain relevant today. Perhaps most significantly, Geneva under Calvin developed a sophisticated system of international communication and coordination. The city maintained regular correspondence with Protestant communities across Europe, sharing information about political developments, religious persecution, and military threats. This intelligence network made Geneva an invaluable resource for rulers and diplomats who needed accurate information about conditions in distant regions. The late 16th and early 17th centuries saw Geneva's diplomatic role evolve in response to changing European politics. The 30 Years' War devastated much of Central Europe, but Geneva's neutrality allowed it to serve as a crucial intermediary between warring factions. The city provided safe passage for diplomats, facilitated prisoner exchanges, and even helped coordinate humanitarian relief efforts. During this period, Geneva developed many of the institutional structures that would later characterize international diplomacy. The city established permanent facilities for hosting diplomatic conferences, including secure meeting rooms, comfortable accommodations for visiting delegations, and reliable communication systems. These practical arrangements might seem mundane, but they were essential for enabling complex international negotiations. Geneva also pioneered the use of professional diplomatic staff who specialized in international law and negotiation techniques. Unlike the noble amateurs who had traditionally conducted diplomacy, these professionals brought systematic approaches to conflict resolution and treaty making. Their expertise made Geneva an increasingly attractive venue for important negotiations, as parties could be confident that local authorities understood the complexities involved. The 1648 Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War, established many of the principles that still govern international relations today. While the actual negotiations took place in other cities, much of the preliminary work was done in Geneva, where representatives from various factions met to establish ground rules for the formal talks. Geneva's contribution to the Westphalian system went beyond logistical support. The city's long experience with religious diversity and political neutrality provided models for the religious tolerance and sovereignty principles that became central to the new international order. In many ways, the Peace of Westphalia universalized approaches to conflict resolution that Geneva had been developing for centuries. The late 17th century brought new challenges as European powers engaged in increasingly global conflicts. The War of Spanish Succession, the Great Northern War, and other major conflicts created demand for neutral venues where belligerents could conduct secret negotiations while publicly maintaining hostile positions. Geneva's reputation for discretion and security made it an ideal location for such delicate diplomacy. During this period, Geneva also began to attract a new type of international visitor, intellectuals and reformers who saw the city as a laboratory for new ideas about government and society. Voltaire, Rousseau, and other Enlightenment thinkers spent significant time in Geneva, and their experiences there influenced their writings about politics and international relations. The presence of these intellectual figures enhanced Geneva's reputation as a centre for progressive thinking about international affairs. The city became associated not just with practical diplomacy, but with innovative approaches to preventing war and promoting human welfare. This intellectual dimension would prove crucial to Geneva's later development as the home of international humanitarian organisations. The 18th century ushered in an era of revolutionary change that would test Geneva's diplomatic traditions like never before. The American Revolution and subsequent French Revolution created upheaval across the Atlantic world, but Geneva's unique position allowed it to serve as a crucial bridge between old and new political orders. When American representatives needed to negotiate with European powers, they often found that Geneva provided the perfect neutral ground for sensitive discussions. Benjamin Franklin himself visited Geneva in 1778, not on official diplomatic business, but to observe the city's governance systems. His letters reveal fascination with how such a small territory could maintain independence while surrounded by much larger powers. Franklin's observations would later influence American thinking about federalism and international relations, demonstrating how Geneva's example rippled outward to shape political developments far beyond Europe. The French Revolution posed a more direct challenge to Geneva's stability. Revolutionary armies swept across Europe, toppling traditional governments and redrawing political maps. In 1798, French forces occupied Geneva, formally ending the Old Republic and incorporating the city into France. For the first time in centuries, Geneva lost its cherished independence and neutral status. Yet even under French rule, Geneva's diplomatic expertise proved invaluable. Napoleon himself recognized the city's potential, using it as a venue for negotiations with various European powers. The Treaty of Campo Formio's preliminary discussions took place in Geneva, as did secret talks regarding the reorganization of Italian territories. Napoleon may have conquered the city, but he couldn't ignore its diplomatic advantages. The Congress of Vienna in 1815 restored Geneva's independence, but more importantly, it formally recognized the principle of Swiss neutrality that would become central to Geneva's future role. The great powers of Europe agreed that Switzerland, including Geneva, would remain permanently neutral in future conflicts. This wasn't just a diplomatic courtesy, it was a practical recognition that Europe needed neutral spaces for conducting international business. The Restoration period saw Geneva actively working to rebuild its diplomatic infrastructure. The city invested heavily in facilities that could accommodate large international gatherings, recognizing that the scale of diplomacy was expanding along with the complexity of international relations. New hotels were built specifically to house diplomatic delegations, secure communication systems were established, and professional staff were trained in the latest diplomatic protocols. Geneva's reputation received a significant boost in 1864 with the founding of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Henry Dunant, a Genevan businessman, had witnessed the horrific aftermath of the Battle of Solferino and was inspired to create an organization dedicated to providing humanitarian aid during wartime. The fact that this groundbreaking institution was founded in Geneva wasn't coincidental. It reflected the city's long-standing commitment to humanitarian principles. The Red Cross chose Geneva as its permanent headquarters precisely because of the city's neutral status and diplomatic traditions. The organization needed a base that would be respected by all nations, and Geneva's centuries of experience in international mediation made it the natural choice. The presence of the Red Cross, in turn, attracted other humanitarian and international organizations to the city. The Geneva Conventions of 1864 established the first international laws governing the treatment of wounded soldiers and medical personnel during warfare. These conventions were negotiated and signed in Geneva, marking the city's emergence as a centre for developing international humanitarian law. The success of these talks demonstrated that Geneva could serve as more than just a venue for ending conflicts. It could also be a place for preventing future suffering through international cooperation. The late 19th century saw Geneva's role expand beyond traditional diplomacy to include what we would now call international governance. The International Telegraph Union, founded in 1865, established its headquarters in nearby Bern, but many of its key meetings took place in Geneva. This marked the beginning of a new type of international organization focused on managing shared resources and technologies rather than resolving political conflicts. Geneva's success in hosting these technical discussions led to requests for the city to handle increasingly complex international issues. The 1890 Brussels Conference on African Affairs used Geneva for preliminary negotiations, recognizing that the city's neutral status made it ideal for discussions involving multiple colonial powers with competing interests. During this period, Geneva also became a center for international legal scholarship. The Institute of International Law, founded in 1873, held many of its sessions in the city and helped develop the theoretical foundations for modern international law. Legal scholars from across Europe and beyond gathered in Geneva to debate questions of sovereignty, territorial rights, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. The presence of these legal experts enhanced Geneva's reputation as a place where complex international problems could be approached systematically rather than through pure political bargaining. This intellectual approach to diplomacy would prove crucial as the world faced increasingly technical challenges that required specialized expertise rather than just political compromise. The early 20th century brought new urgency to international cooperation as technological advances made warfare more devastating than ever before. The Hague Peace Conferences of 1899 and 1907 didn't take place in Geneva, but much of the preparatory work was done there, and Genevan legal experts played crucial roles in drafting the conventions that emerged from those meetings. Geneva's contribution to the Hague process extended beyond technical expertise. The city's long experience with religious and political diversity provided practical models for how different legal and political systems could work together. The Hague Conventions drew heavily on precedents established in Geneva's own governance systems and diplomatic practices. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 presented Geneva with its greatest challenge yet. Switzerland's neutrality was respected by the warring powers, but the city found itself hosting refugees, facilitating prisoner exchanges, and serving as a communication hub between enemies. The International Committee of the Red Cross, based in Geneva, coordinated humanitarian efforts on an unprecedented scale. During the war years, Geneva also served as a crucial centre for secret diplomacy. Representatives of warring nations met regularly in the city to discuss prisoner exchanges, the treatment of civilians, and other humanitarian issues. These meetings established precedents for conducting negotiations even during active hostilities, demonstrating that diplomacy could continue even when formal relations had broken down. The war also brought new international organisations to Geneva. The International Labour Organization began planning its post-war activities from the city, recognising that lasting peace would require attention to social and economic issues, as well as political settlements. This broader conception of international cooperation would profoundly influence Geneva's post-war development. As the war dragged on, Geneva became increasingly important as a neutral venue for exploring possible peace settlements. Various unofficial representatives met in the city to discuss terms that might be acceptable to different parties, laying groundwork for the eventual armistice negotiations. While the formal peace talks would take place elsewhere, Geneva's role in preparing the way was widely recognised. The armistice of November 1918 created an opportunity for Geneva to play an even more significant role in international affairs. The city's centuries of experience in diplomacy, its established infrastructure for international meetings, and its reputation for neutrality made it an obvious candidate for hosting the new international organisations that were being planned to prevent future wars. President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points called for the creation of a General Association of Nations to maintain peace, but the specific form and location of this organisation remained to be determined. Geneva's supporters argued that the city's unique history and practical advantages made it the ideal headquarters for such an ambitious undertaking. The debate over where to locate the new League of Nations revealed much about how different nations viewed international cooperation. Some powers preferred a location in one of the major capitals, while others worried that this would give too much influence to the host nation. Geneva's status as a neutral city in a permanently neutral country addressed these concerns while offering practical advantages that no major capital could match. In 1920, the League of Nations officially established its headquarters in Geneva, marking the beginning of a new chapter in both the city's history and the development of international organisation. The choice was more than symbolic. It represented a recognition that effective international cooperation required not just good intentions, but also the right institutional setting and accumulated expertise in managing complex diplomatic relationships. The establishment of the League of Nations in Geneva represented more than just a diplomatic victory for the city. It marked the beginning of an entirely new era in international relations. For the first time in human history, the world had created a permanent institution dedicated to preventing war through collective action and diplomatic dialogue. And Geneva, with its centuries of accumulated wisdom in managing international disputes, would serve as the stage for this unprecedented experiment. The League's arrival transformed Geneva in ways that even the most optimistic observers hadn't anticipated. The city suddenly found itself hosting not just occasional diplomatic conferences, but a permanent international community. Delegates from dozens of nations established residences in Geneva, creating a truly cosmopolitan atmosphere unlike anything the city had experienced before. Local businesses adapted to serve this international clientele, while Geneva's hotels, restaurants, and cultural institutions evolved to accommodate the diverse needs of their global guests. The Palace of Nations, constructed specifically to house the League, became an architectural symbol of international cooperation. The building's design reflected contributions from multiple countries, embodying the collaborative spirit that the League hoped to foster. But more importantly, the palace provided Geneva with infrastructure capable of supporting large-scale international gatherings on a regular basis rather than just during occasional crises. The League's early years in Geneva witnessed both remarkable successes and sobering limitations. The organisation successfully mediated territorial disputes between smaller nations, established international standards for labour conditions, and coordinated humanitarian relief efforts. These achievements demonstrated that systematic international cooperation could indeed produce tangible benefits for human welfare. Perhaps most significantly, the League pioneered new forms of multilateral diplomacy that went far beyond traditional bilateral negotiations between individual nations. The assembly sessions brought together representatives from every member nation to debate issues of global concern, while the Council provided a smaller forum for addressing urgent crises. These institutional innovations, developed and refined in Geneva, established templates that continue to influence international organisations today. The city's role extended beyond simply hosting League meetings. Geneva became a laboratory for developing new approaches to international law, economic cooperation, and social reform. The International Labour Organization, based alongside the League in Geneva, created the first global standards for worker protection and employment practices. The Permanent Court of International Justice, though technically located in The Hague, maintained close ties with Geneva and often relied on the city's legal expertise. During the 1920s, Geneva's reputation as a centre for progressive internationalism attracted intellectuals, activists, and reformers from around the world. The city became a hub for new thinking about how nations could cooperate to address shared challenges like economic instability, public health crises, and technological change. This intellectual ferment contributed to Geneva's influence far beyond the formal diplomatic activities centred at the Palace of Nations. The economic cooperation initiatives developed in Geneva during this period proved particularly significant. The League sponsored conferences on international trade, monetary policy, and economic reconstruction that brought together not just government officials, but also business leaders, academic economists, and representatives from international financial institutions. These gatherings established precedents for the kind of economic diplomacy that would become increasingly important as national economies became more interconnected. Geneva also served as a crucial venue for addressing the complex aftermath of World War I. The city hosted negotiations regarding war reparations, territorial adjustments, and the protection of ethnic minorities in newly created states. These discussions often proved contentious, but Geneva's neutral atmosphere and experienced diplomatic staff helped facilitate agreements that might have been impossible in more politically charged settings. The refugee crisis that followed the war provided another opportunity for Geneva to demonstrate its humanitarian leadership. The League's High Commissioner for Refugees, based in Geneva, coordinated international efforts to assist the millions of people displaced by the conflict and its aftermath. This work established important precedents for international refugee protection and demonstrated how Geneva could serve as a centre for addressing humanitarian challenges on a global scale. The 1930s brought new tests for Geneva's diplomatic institutions as international tensions escalated and the League of Nations faced increasingly serious challenges. The Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the Italian conquest of Ethiopia, and the rise of Nazi Germany created crises that strained the League's capacity for collective action. Yet even as the organisation struggled to prevent these conflicts, Geneva continued to serve as an important forum for international dialogue. During these troubled years, Geneva's value as a neutral venue became even more apparent. As formal diplomatic relations between various nations deteriorated, the city provided crucial channels for unofficial communication and negotiation. Representatives who couldn't meet openly in their own capitals could still gather in Geneva to explore possible solutions to international disputes. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 effectively ended the League of Nations as an active force in international affairs, but Geneva's role as a diplomatic centre proved more resilient than any single organisation. Switzerland's continued neutrality meant that the city could still host international meetings, facilitate humanitarian activities, and provide secure channels for communication between warring parties. The International Committee of the Red Cross, with its headquarters in Geneva, played a crucial role throughout the war years. The organisation coordinated prisoner of war services, monitored compliance with international humanitarian law, and provided aid to civilian populations caught in combat zones. The fact that this vital humanitarian work was based in Geneva reinforced the city's reputation as a centre for international cooperation, even during the darkest periods of human conflict. Geneva also served as a crucial intelligence hub during the war, though this role was necessarily more secretive than the city's traditional diplomatic functions. The concentration of international organisations, diplomatic missions, and multinational corporations in Geneva created opportunities for information gathering and communication that proved valuable to various parties. The city's tradition of discretion and its legal framework protecting diplomatic communications made it an ideal location for such sensitive activities. As the war progressed, Geneva became increasingly important as a venue for planning post-war reconstruction and international organisation. Representatives of the Allied powers met regularly in the city to discuss not just military strategy, but also the political and economic arrangements that would govern the post-war world. These discussions built on Geneva's accumulated expertise in international cooperation, while anticipating the much larger challenges that would face the international community after the conflict ended. The establishment of the United Nations in 1945 might have been expected to diminish Geneva's importance, especially since the new organisation chose New York rather than Geneva as its primary headquarters. However, the UN's founders recognised that the complexity of post-war challenges would require multiple institutional centres, and Geneva's unique advantages made it an obvious choice for hosting major UN operations. The decision to locate the UN's European headquarters in Geneva reflected both practical considerations and symbolic recognition of the city's diplomatic heritage. The existing infrastructure, experienced international staff, and established diplomatic community provided immediate advantages that would have taken years to develop elsewhere. More fundamentally, Geneva's association with international cooperation and humanitarian values aligned perfectly with the UN's aspirations for creating a more peaceful and just world order. The UN's arrival in Geneva during the late 1940s marked the beginning of another transformation in the city's character and role. Unlike the League of Nations, which had been primarily focused on preventing war between nation-states, the UN addressed a much broader range of international challenges, including economic development, human rights, social welfare, and environmental protection. This expanded mandate required new forms of expertise and institutional capacity that Geneva proved uniquely capable of providing. The World Health Organization, established in 1948, with its headquarters in Geneva, exemplified this broader approach to international cooperation. The organization's mission to promote global health required not just diplomatic skills, but also technical expertise, scientific research capabilities, and the ability to coordinate complex international programs. Geneva's combination of diplomatic infrastructure and intellectual resources made it an ideal base for such ambitious undertakings. During the 1950s, Geneva emerged as a center for what scholars would later term multilateral diplomacy, involving not just nation-states but also international organizations, non-governmental groups, and private sector actors. The city hosted conferences that brought together government officials, business leaders, academic experts, and civil society representatives to address shared challenges in ways that transcended traditional diplomatic boundaries. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 represented perhaps the most significant achievement of this period. Building on the city's long tradition of developing international humanitarian law, these conventions established comprehensive protections for civilians, prisoners of war, and other non-combatants during armed conflict. The fact that these crucial agreements were negotiated and signed in Geneva reflected both the city's expertise in such matters and its symbolic importance as a centre for humanitarian values. The Cold War created new challenges for Geneva's diplomatic role as the world divided into competing ideological blocs. However, the city's neutral status proved more valuable than ever as tensions between East and West made direct communication increasingly difficult. Geneva provided one of the few venues where American and Soviet representatives could meet regularly to discuss issues of mutual concern, even during periods when formal diplomatic relations were severely strained. The 1955 Geneva Summit brought together the leaders of the United States, Soviet Union, Britain, and France for the first major post-war superpower conference. Though the summit didn't resolve the fundamental tensions of the Cold War, it demonstrated that even the most serious international conflicts could be addressed through diplomatic dialogue when conducted in the right setting. Geneva's role in facilitating this historic meeting reinforced its position as the world's premier venue for high-stakes international negotiations. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Geneva continued to evolve as new types of international challenges required innovative diplomatic approaches. The city hosted negotiations on nuclear disarmament, trade liberalization, environmental protection, and human rights that involved not just traditional diplomats, but also technical experts, scientists, and representatives from emerging fields of international cooperation. The Geneva Conference on Indochina in 1954 had already demonstrated the city's capacity to handle complex regional conflicts involving multiple parties with competing interests. The negotiations that led to the temporary division of Vietnam showcased Geneva's ability to provide neutral ground for addressing the most sensitive political issues of the Cold War era, even when perfect solutions proved impossible to achieve. Human rights emerged as another crucial area where Geneva's diplomatic expertise proved invaluable. The UN Commission on Human Rights, based in the city, developed international standards and monitoring mechanisms that fundamentally changed how the international community addressed questions of individual dignity and government accountability. The annual sessions of the Commission became important forums for holding nations accountable for their treatment of their own citizens, representing a significant evolution in traditional concepts of sovereignty and non-interference. The proliferation of international organizations in Geneva during this period created what observers began to call International Geneva, a unique ecosystem of diplomatic institutions, humanitarian organizations, and international businesses that operated according to its own distinctive culture and practices. This community transcended national boundaries while remaining rooted in Geneva's particular traditions of neutrality, discretion, and commitment to peaceful conflict resolution. By the 1980s, Geneva had become not just a centre for traditional diplomacy, but also a hub for addressing the emerging challenges of globalization. Issues like international trade, environmental protection, telecommunications regulation, and intellectual property rights required new forms of international cooperation that combined diplomatic negotiation with technical expertise and private sector involvement. Geneva's flexible institutional framework and accumulated experience made it particularly well suited for developing innovative approaches to these complex challenges. The World Trade Organization's establishment in Geneva in 1995 marked another pivotal moment in the city's evolution as a centre for global governance. Unlike previous international organizations that focused primarily on preventing conflict or providing humanitarian assistance, the WTO was tasked with managing the increasingly complex web of international commercial relationships that characterized the modern global economy. Geneva's selection as the organization's headquarters reflected recognition that effective trade diplomacy required the same neutral environment and accumulated expertise that had made the city successful in other areas of international cooperation. The WTO's arrival brought new challenges and opportunities that tested Geneva's capacity to adapt to changing international needs. Trade negotiations involved not just government representatives, but also business associations, labour unions, environmental groups, and consumer advocates, creating a more diverse and complex diplomatic environment than the city had previously experienced. Geneva's institutions proved remarkably adaptable, developing new procedures and facilities to accommodate this broader range of participants, while maintaining the discretion and security that remained essential for sensitive negotiations. During the 1990s, Geneva also emerged as a crucial centre for addressing the humanitarian crises that erupted as the Cold War ended and new conflicts emerged around the world. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, based in Geneva since 1951, found itself coordinating responses to massive refugee flows from the Balkans, Africa, and other regions experiencing post-Cold War instability. The city's concentration of humanitarian expertise and its established relationships with donor governments and relief organizations made it uniquely capable of mounting rapid responses to these emerging crises. The complexity of modern humanitarian emergencies required new forms of coordination between different types of international actors. Geneva became a pioneer in developing integrated approaches that brought together UN agencies, non-governmental organizations, military forces, and private contractors to address multifaceted crises that combined elements of armed conflict, natural disaster, economic collapse, and social breakdown. The city's neutral status and diplomatic traditions provided essential foundation for these innovative partnerships. The information revolution of the 1990s and early 2000s transformed Geneva's role in ways that even experienced observers found surprising. The International Telecommunication Union headquartered in Geneva since 1947, suddenly found itself at the center of efforts to govern the emerging internet and manage the global transition to digital communications. The technical complexity of these issues required new forms of expertise, but the underlying diplomatic challenges of coordinating policies among sovereign nations remained familiar territory for Geneva's institutional community. Internet governance discussions in Geneva brought together participants who had never previously engaged in traditional diplomacy. Software engineers, telecommunications executives, civil liberties advocates, and academic researchers joined government representatives in complex negotiations about technical standards, content regulation, and digital rights. Geneva's experience in managing diverse stakeholder processes proved invaluable as the international community struggled to develop governance mechanisms for this unprecedented global commons. The September 11th attacks in 2001 created new security challenges that affected Geneva's operations in fundamental ways. The city's tradition of openness and accessibility had always been central to its effectiveness as a diplomatic venue, but concerns about international terrorism required new approaches to protecting participants while maintaining the transparent character that made Geneva attractive for international negotiations. The balance between security and openness became a constant challenge that required ongoing adaptation and innovation. Counter-terrorism cooperation became another area where Geneva's neutral status proved valuable. Intelligence agencies and law enforcement organizations that couldn't collaborate openly in their home countries could meet regularly in Geneva to share information and coordinate responses to shared threats. The city's legal framework protecting diplomatic communications and its tradition of discretion made it an ideal venue for such sensitive cooperation, even between nations that maintained adversarial relationships in other contexts. The early 21st century also saw Geneva emerge as a centre for addressing environmental challenges that transcended national boundaries. Climate change negotiations, biodiversity conservation efforts, and sustainable development initiatives required new forms of international cooperation that combined scientific research, economic analysis, and political diplomacy. Geneva's accumulated expertise in managing complex multilateral processes made it a natural location for developing institutional responses to these unprecedented global challenges. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, though not formally headquartered in Geneva, relied heavily on the city's institutional infrastructure and expertise for its assessment processes. The panel's work demonstrated how Geneva could serve as a bridge between the scientific community and political decision-makers, translating technical research into policy recommendations that could guide international negotiations. This bridging function became increasingly important as global challenges required responses that combined multiple forms of expertise. Geneva's role in nuclear disarmament negotiations during this period illustrated both the possibilities and limitations of diplomatic efforts to address existential threats. The Conference on Disarmament, based in Geneva since 1979, provided a permanent forum for discussing arms control issues. But the fundamental tensions between nuclear and non-nuclear states often proved impossible to resolve through traditional diplomatic means. Nevertheless, the city's neutral environment allowed for discussions that might have been impossible elsewhere, and even failed negotiations often contributed to longer-term progress by clarifying different positions and building personal relationships between key participants. The 2008 financial crisis created new demands for international economic coordination that drew on Geneva's established expertise in trade and development issues. The World Trade Organization found itself at the center of efforts to prevent the kind of protectionist spiral that had worsened the Great Depression, while other Geneva-based organizations worked to address the humanitarian consequences of global economic instability. The crisis demonstrated how Geneva's various international institutions could work together to address multifaceted challenges that cross traditional organizational boundaries. During the same period, Geneva became increasingly important as a venue for what scholars termed Track 2 diplomacy, involving unofficial representatives who could explore sensitive issues without the formal constraints that limited government negotiators. Academic institutions, think tanks, and civil society organizations based in Geneva developed extensive networks for facilitating informal dialogue between parties to various international disputes. These unofficial channels often proved crucial for preparing the ground for formal negotiations or maintaining communication during periods when official relations had broken down. The rise of social media and digital communications created new opportunities and challenges for Geneva's diplomatic community. International negotiations that had previously taken place behind closed doors suddenly found themselves subject to real-time scrutiny and commentary from global audiences. Geneva's institutions had to adapt their procedures to accommodate this new transparency while maintaining the confidentiality that remained essential for sensitive discussions. Digital diplomacy also created opportunities for broader participation in international negotiations. Non-governmental organizations, academic experts, and civil society representatives could now monitor proceedings and contribute to discussions in ways that had previously been impossible. Geneva proved particularly adept at integrating these new voices while maintaining the structured character that made complex multilateral negotiations manageable. The Syrian civil war that began in 2011 provided a sobering test of Geneva's capacity to address contemporary international conflicts. The Geneva Communiqué of 2012 established a framework for political transition that gained widespread international support, but implementing this framework proved extraordinarily difficult given the complex array of domestic and international actors involved in the conflict. Multiple rounds of Geneva talks brought together various Syrian factions and international supporters, but the fundamental disagreements between different parties often proved impossible to bridge through diplomatic means alone. Nevertheless, the Syrian negotiations demonstrated Geneva's continued relevance as a venue for addressing even the most intractable international conflicts. The city's neutral status allowed parties that couldn't meet elsewhere to engage in direct dialogue, while Geneva's experienced diplomatic community provided essential support for managing complex multilateral processes. Even when formal negotiations failed to produce agreements, the discussions often contributed to humanitarian arrangements that saved lives and maintained communication channels that proved valuable for future diplomatic efforts. The refugee crisis that accompanied the Syrian conflict and other regional instabilities created unprecedented challenges for international humanitarian organizations based in Geneva. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees found itself coordinating responses to the largest refugee flows since World War II, while other Geneva-based organizations worked to address the root causes of displacement and develop more effective approaches to refugee protection and integration. These humanitarian challenges highlighted both the strengths and limitations of Geneva's international institutional framework. The city's concentration of expertise and established coordination mechanisms enabled rapid mobilization of international assistance, but the scale and complexity of contemporary crises often overwhelmed existing capacities. Geneva's organizations found themselves pioneering new approaches that combined traditional humanitarian assistance with longer-term development programming and diplomatic efforts to address underlying conflicts. The COVID-19 pandemic that emerged in 2020 created the most severe test of Geneva's international institutions since World War II. The World Health Organization found itself at the center of global efforts to coordinate responses to an unprecedented health emergency, while other Geneva-based organizations work to address the pandemic's economic, social, and humanitarian consequences. The crisis demonstrated both the vital importance of international cooperation and the continuing challenges of achieving effective coordination among sovereign nations facing existential threats. Geneva's response to the pandemic illustrated how the city's institutional ecosystem could rapidly adapt to address new challenges while drawing on centuries of accumulated expertise. The combination of technical knowledge, diplomatic experience, and neutral venue proved essential for facilitating international cooperation during a period when many traditional forms of international engagement were severely constrained by travel restrictions and other public health measures. The pandemic also accelerated trends toward digital diplomacy that had been developing for years. Geneva's international organizations quickly adapted to virtual meetings and remote participation, discovering new possibilities for inclusive engagement while confronting the limitations of digital interaction for building the personal relationships that remained crucial for effective diplomacy. The city's institutions became laboratories for developing hybrid approaches that combined digital efficiency with in-person engagement when circumstances permitted. As Geneva approaches its 800th anniversary as a centre for international diplomacy, the city continues to evolve in response to changing global challenges while maintaining the essential characteristics that have made it unique. The rise of new global powers, the emergence of non-state actors as significant international participants, and the increasing complexity of transnational challenges all require continued adaptation of Geneva's institutional framework and diplomatic practices. Contemporary discussions about reforming international governance often focus on Geneva as both a symbol of existing institutions and a potential model for future innovations. The city's experience in managing complex multilateral processes, accommodating diverse participants, and maintaining neutrality amid competing interests provides valuable lessons for addressing the governance challenges of an increasingly interconnected world. The question facing Geneva today isn't whether the city will remain relevant to international affairs, but how it will continue to adapt its unique combination of institutional capacity, accumulated expertise, and neutral status to address challenges that previous generations of diplomats could never have imagined. Climate change, artificial intelligence, space governance, and biotechnology regulation all require new forms of international cooperation that will test Geneva's capacity for continued innovation while drawing on its deep traditions of diplomatic excellence. Geneva's story demonstrates that effective international cooperation requires more than good intentions or formal agreements. It requires the right institutional setting, accumulated expertise, and sustained commitment to the patient work of building understanding across cultural and political differences. As humanity faces challenges that transcend national boundaries and require unprecedented levels of cooperation, Geneva's 8 centuries of experience in facilitating international dialogue offer both inspiration and practical guidance for the difficult work that lies ahead. Today's Geneva hosts more than 40 international organizations and hundreds of non-governmental entities, creating a diplomatic ecosystem unlike anywhere else on Earth. The city processes thousands of international agreements each year, from bilateral trade deals to multilateral treaties affecting billions of people. Yet this remarkable concentration of global governance emerged not through grand design, but through centuries of gradual evolution, as Geneva repeatedly demonstrated its unique capacity to facilitate cooperation between parties who might otherwise remain forever at odds. The modern visitor to Geneva encounters this diplomatic heritage at every turn. The red and white flags of Switzerland flutter alongside the blue banners of the United Nations, while the distinctive architecture of international organizations creates a landscape that speaks to humanity's ongoing efforts to govern itself collectively. But understanding Geneva's contemporary role requires appreciating how profoundly the nature of international relations has changed since the city first began hosting diplomatic gatherings in the medieval period. The emergence of global civil society as a significant force in international affairs has transformed Geneva's traditional role as a venue for government-to-government negotiations. Today's diplomatic conferences routinely include representatives from environmental organizations, human rights groups, business associations, and academic institutions alongside traditional state delegations. This evolution reflects broader changes in how international governance operates, but Geneva's institutional framework has proved remarkably adaptable to accommodating these new participants. The World Economic Forum, though technically based in nearby Cologne rather than Geneva proper, exemplifies this transformation of international dialogue. The forum's annual meetings bring together heads of state, corporate executives, civil society leaders, and academic experts to address global challenges in ways that transcend traditional diplomatic categories. While critics debate the forum's influence and legitimacy, its success in facilitating high-level dialogue across sectors demonstrates the continued appeal of the Geneva model for international engagement. Geneva's universities and research institutions have become increasingly important components of the city's diplomatic ecosystem. The Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, founded in 1927, has trained generations of diplomats, international civil servants, and policy analysts who now work throughout the global system of international organizations. The presence of such institutions creates a constant flow of new ideas and expertise that refreshes Geneva's diplomatic community while maintaining continuity with established traditions. The city's role in international arbitration has expanded dramatically as globalization has created new forms of cross-border disputes requiring neutral resolution. The World Intellectual Property Organization's Arbitration and Mediation Center, based in Geneva, handles thousands of cases annually involving everything from trademark disputes to technology transfer agreements. These technical arbitrations might seem far removed from traditional diplomacy, but they represent the same fundamental challenge of creating fair processes for resolving conflicts between parties from different legal and cultural systems. International sports governance provides another illustration of Geneva's continuing relevance in managing global affairs. The International Olympic Committee maintains its headquarters in nearby Lausanne, but many international sports federations operate from Geneva, drawn by the city's neutral status and expertise in managing complex international relationships. The challenges of coordinating global sporting events, addressing doping scandals, and managing political tensions within international sports competitions require many of the same skills that Geneva has been developing for centuries in other contexts. The rise of cryptocurrency and digital assets has created entirely new categories of international regulatory challenges that require the kind of neutral forum that Geneva has traditionally provided. The Bank for International Settlements, while headquartered in Basel, maintains significant operations in Geneva and regularly hosts discussions among central bankers about how to address the monetary policy implications of digital currencies. These highly technical discussions might seem removed from traditional diplomacy, but they address fundamental questions about sovereignty, regulation, and international cooperation that have always been central to Geneva's mission. Geneva's concentration of international media organizations creates another dimension of the city's contemporary relevance. Major news outlets maintain permanent bureaus in Geneva, specifically to cover international organizations and diplomatic developments. This media presence ensures that Geneva's diplomatic activities receive global attention while creating additional channels for informal communication between different parties. The relationship between diplomacy and media coverage has become increasingly complex in the digital age. But Geneva's experience in managing this relationship provides valuable lessons for other international centres. The city's approach to managing security challenges illustrates how traditional diplomatic principles can adapt to contemporary threats. Geneva's security arrangements must accommodate thousands of international visitors while maintaining the open atmosphere that makes the city attractive for diplomatic engagement. The challenge of protecting high-profile diplomatic meetings from terrorist threats without creating fortress-like conditions that undermine the accessibility essential for effective diplomacy requires constant innovation and adaptation. Cybersecurity has emerged as another area where Geneva's expertise in international cooperation proves valuable. The Internet Governance Forum, which meets regularly in Geneva, brings together government representatives, private sector actors, and civil society organizations to address the governance challenges created by global digital networks. These discussions must navigate complex technical issues while addressing fundamental political questions about sovereignty, privacy, and freedom of expression that have no easy answers. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated both the vital importance of Geneva's international institutions and their limitations in addressing truly global challenges. The World Health Organization's pandemic response was closely scrutinized and frequently criticized, but the crisis also highlighted how much worse the global response might have been without existing mechanisms for international coordination. Geneva's role during the pandemic illustrated how international institutions can provide essential coordination even when they lack the authority to compel national compliance with their recommendations. Climate change negotiations represent perhaps the most complex challenge currently facing Geneva's diplomatic community. The technical complexity of climate science, the economic implications of emissions reduction policies, and the fundamental questions of justice between developed and developing nations create diplomatic challenges that dwarf anything previous generations faced. Yet Geneva's accumulated expertise in managing complex multilateral processes has proved essential for making progress on this existential challenge, even when that progress often seems frustratingly slow. The city's approach to managing diverse stakeholder participation in climate negotiations illustrates how traditional diplomatic processes can evolve to accommodate new forms of international engagement. Indigenous peoples' organizations, youth movements, and business coalitions now participate alongside government delegations in climate discussions, creating opportunities for broader input while complicating the negotiation process. Geneva's institutional framework has developed innovative procedures for managing this complexity while maintaining focus on achieving concrete results. Trade policy represents another area where Geneva continues to pioneer new approaches to international cooperation. The World Trade Organization's dispute resolution system processes hundreds of cases annually, creating a body of international trade law that governs trillions of dollars in global commerce. The WTO's appellate body, based in Geneva, has effectively created an international court system for trade disputes that operates according to legal rather than purely political principles. The challenges facing the international trading system illustrate broader tensions in contemporary international relations between sovereignty and integration, between national democratic processes and international commitments, and between economic efficiency and social protection. Geneva's role in addressing these tensions through the WTO system provides a window into how international institutions can evolve to address changing global conditions while maintaining legitimacy with their diverse membership. Artificial intelligence governance represents an emerging area where Geneva's expertise in international cooperation may prove crucial for humanity's future. The rapid development of AI technologies creates regulatory challenges that transcend national boundaries, while the potential risks and benefits of these technologies are so significant that international coordination seems essential. Early discussions about AI governance have already begun taking place in Geneva, drawing on the city's experience in managing complex technical issues with profound political implications. The question of how to govern emerging technologies while preserving space for innovation illustrates the kind of challenge that has always required Geneva's particular combination of technical expertise and diplomatic skill. The city's international organizations must find ways to facilitate cooperation between nations with very different approaches to technology regulation while addressing legitimate concerns about privacy, security, and human rights. Space governance provides another example of how Geneva's diplomatic traditions apply to entirely new domains. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 was negotiated through the United Nations system with significant input from Geneva-based experts, and contemporary discussions about space traffic management, asteroid mining rights, and military activities in space continue to draw on Geneva's expertise in international law and conflict prevention. The commercialization of space activities has created new stakeholders who must be integrated into traditional diplomatic processes. Private space companies, scientific research institutions, and military organizations all have interests in space governance that don't always align with traditional diplomatic categories. Geneva's experience in managing diverse stakeholder participation in other issue areas provides valuable precedents for addressing these challenges. Biotechnology regulation represents yet another frontier where Geneva's international institutions are developing new approaches to global governance. The World Health Organization's work on regulating genetic engineering, the World Intellectual Property Organization's efforts to balance innovation incentives with access to essential medicines, and various human rights organizations' concerns about genetic privacy all intersect in complex ways that require careful diplomatic coordination. The ethical dimensions of biotechnology policy illustrate how contemporary international cooperation must address fundamental questions about human dignity and social justice that go far beyond traditional diplomatic concerns. Geneva's long tradition of humanitarian advocacy provides important resources for addressing these challenges, but the technical complexity of biotechnology issues requires new forms of expertise that must be integrated into established diplomatic processes. Migration governance has become another crucial area where Geneva's expertise proves essential for addressing global challenges. The International Organization for Migration, headquartered in Geneva since 2015, coordinates international responses to both forced and voluntary migration flows that affect hundreds of millions of people annually. The organization's work illustrates how Geneva serves not just as a venue for negotiating agreements, but as an operational center for implementing international cooperation programs. The complexity of contemporary migration challenges requires integration of humanitarian assistance, development programming, security cooperation, and diplomatic negotiation in ways that transcend traditional organizational boundaries. Geneva's concentration of different types of international organizations creates opportunities for this kind of integrated approach, while highlighting the continuing challenges of achieving effective coordination among institutions with different mandates and constituencies. Financial regulation provides another illustration of how Geneva contributes to addressing challenges that emerge from economic globalization. The Financial Stability Board, while not formally headquartered in Geneva, relies heavily on the city's infrastructure for coordinating international regulatory cooperation among central banks and financial supervisory authorities. These highly technical discussions about banking regulation and monetary policy have profound implications for global economic stability and national sovereignty. The 2008 financial crisis demonstrated how rapidly problems in one country's financial system can spread globally, creating demands for international coordination that go far beyond traditional diplomatic cooperation. Geneva's role in facilitating ongoing discussions about international financial regulation illustrates how the city continues to adapt its traditional diplomatic functions to address new forms of interdependence that require sustained technical cooperation rather than occasional political negotiations. Geneva's educational institutions have become increasingly important for developing the next generation of international cooperation professionals. The city hosts numerous specialized programs that train diplomats, international lawyers, humanitarian workers, and technical experts who will staff international organizations around the world. This educational function represents a less visible but crucial contribution to global governance capacity that builds on Geneva's accumulated expertise while ensuring its continuation. The presence of these educational institutions also creates ongoing opportunities for research and innovation in international cooperation methods. Academic experts based in Geneva regularly contribute to policy discussions while maintaining the analytical distance necessary for objective evaluation of different approaches. This combination of practical engagement and academic analysis helps ensure that Geneva's diplomatic community continues to learn from both successes and failures. Cultural diplomacy has emerged as another area where Geneva's international character provides unique advantages. The city regularly hosts cultural exchanges, artistic collaborations, and educational programs that complement formal diplomatic activities while building the personal relationships that remain essential for effective international cooperation. These cultural dimensions of Geneva's international role often receive less attention than formal negotiations, but they contribute significantly to creating the trust and understanding that makes substantive cooperation possible. The diversity of Geneva's international community creates natural opportunities for cross-cultural learning and innovation that extend far beyond formal diplomatic activities. Restaurants serving cuisine from every continent, cultural festivals celebrating different traditions, and religious institutions representing various faith communities all contribute to an atmosphere of international understanding that supports the city's formal diplomatic functions. Geneva's approach to managing linguistic diversity illustrates another dimension of the city's expertise in international cooperation. Official meetings must accommodate multiple languages while maintaining the precision necessary for legal and technical discussions. The city has developed sophisticated interpretation and translation capabilities that enable effective communication across linguistic barriers. But this technical capacity must be combined with cultural sensitivity and diplomatic skill to ensure that substantive understanding, rather than mere comprehension, is achieved. The role of non-governmental organizations in Geneva's diplomatic ecosystem has expanded dramatically over recent decades, creating both opportunities and challenges for traditional diplomatic processes. Environmental groups, human rights organizations, business associations, and academic institutions now participate routinely in discussions that were once limited to government representatives. This broader participation can enhance the legitimacy and effectiveness of international agreements, but it also complicates negotiation processes and raises questions about accountability and representation. Geneva's experience in managing this evolution toward more inclusive international processes provides valuable lessons for other international centres facing similar challenges. The city has developed innovative procedures for stakeholder consultation, transparent decision-making processes, and accountability mechanisms that attempt to balance broad participation with effective governance. These innovations remain works in progress, but they represent important experiments in democratizing international cooperation. The rise of regional and subglobal governance arrangements has created new challenges for Geneva's traditionally universal approach to international cooperation. Regional trade agreements, security partnerships, and environmental cooperatives often address issues that also require global coordination, creating potential conflicts between different levels of international governance. Geneva's international organizations must find ways to coordinate with these regional arrangements while maintaining their global mandates and inclusive character. This tension between regional and global approaches to international cooperation reflects broader changes in the international system that challenge some of the assumptions underlying Geneva's traditional role. The emergence of multiple centers of global power, the increasing importance of non-state actors, and the growing complexity of transnational challenges all require continued adaptation of Geneva's institutional framework and diplomatic practices. Private sector engagement in international governance represents another area where Geneva has pioneered new approaches that influence global practices. The World Economic Forum's Stakeholder Capitalism Initiative, various public-private partnerships in development programming, and corporate participation in standard-setting processes all illustrate how business actors have become integral to contemporary international cooperation. Geneva's experience in managing these relationships provides models for other international centers while raising important questions about democratic accountability and corporate influence. The increasing importance of data governance in international relations has created new demands for Geneva's expertise in managing complex technical issues with profound political implications. Questions about cross-border data flows, privacy protection, artificial intelligence regulation, and digital taxation require international coordination that combines technical expertise with diplomatic skill. Geneva's international organizations are developing new approaches to these challenges that may influence how other emerging technologies are governed internationally. Geneva's role in addressing global health challenges extends far beyond the World Health Organization's formal mandate to include a broader ecosystem of organizations working on different aspects of health policy. The Gavi Alliance, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria, and numerous other health-focused organizations maintain significant operations in Geneva, creating a concentration of global health expertise that enables coordinated responses to health challenges affecting billions of people. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted both the strengths and limitations of this health governance ecosystem. Geneva-based organizations played crucial roles in coordinating vaccine development, sharing epidemiological information, and providing technical assistance to countries facing health system challenges. However, the pandemic also revealed gaps in global health governance that require new approaches to international cooperation and emergency preparedness. Educational cooperation represents another growing area of Geneva's international activities as globalization creates demands for internationally comparable educational standards and cross-border academic collaboration. The International Baccalaureate Organization, based in Geneva, has developed educational programs used by schools around the world, while various UNESCO initiatives coordinate international educational cooperation from Geneva offices. The role of education in promoting international understanding and cooperation has been a theme in Geneva's activities since the League of Nations period, but contemporary challenges require new approaches that address both the opportunities and risks created by global educational integration. Questions about cultural preservation, educational equity, and the role of technology in learning all require international dialogue that draws on Geneva's accumulated expertise in managing complex multilateral processes. Scientific cooperation represents yet another dimension of Geneva's contemporary role in international affairs. CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, maintains its headquarters in Geneva and serves as a model for international scientific collaboration that transcends political boundaries. The organization's success in advancing fundamental physics research while maintaining peaceful cooperation among nations with different political systems illustrates principles that apply far beyond scientific research. The challenges facing international scientific cooperation in an era of increasing technological competition between major powers test Geneva's traditional approaches to maintaining neutrality and facilitating cooperation. Questions about technology transfer, intellectual property protection, and dual-use research all require diplomatic solutions that balance legitimate security concerns with the benefits of scientific collaboration. As we look toward the future, Geneva's role in international affairs will likely continue to evolve in response to changing global challenges and opportunities. Climate change, technological innovation, demographic transitions, and shifts in global power all create demands for new forms of international cooperation that will test Geneva's institutional capacity and diplomatic traditions. However, the city's 8 centuries of experience in adapting to changing circumstances, while maintaining its essential character as a neutral venue for international cooperation, suggests that Geneva will continue to play a vital role in humanity's efforts to govern itself collectively. The lessons learned from Geneva's long history of international cooperation remain relevant for addressing contemporary challenges that our predecessors could never have imagined. The patient work of building trust across cultural and political differences, the careful development of institutional frameworks that can accommodate diverse interests, and the sustained commitment to peaceful conflict resolution all represent contributions that transcend any particular historical moment or specific policy challenge. Geneva's story illustrates that effective international cooperation requires more than formal agreements or institutional structures. It requires the accumulated wisdom that comes from generations of experience in managing human differences constructively, the practical knowledge that enables complex organizations to function effectively across cultural boundaries, and the moral commitment to seeking solutions that serve broader human interests rather than narrow national advantages. The challenges facing humanity in the 21st century will require unprecedented levels of international cooperation to address successfully. Climate change, technological governance, global health security, and economic inequality all demand responses that transcend national boundaries and require sustained collaboration among diverse stakeholders. Geneva's centuries of experience in facilitating such cooperation provide both inspiration and practical guidance for the difficult work that lies ahead. While the city's continuing evolution demonstrates that international cooperation can adapt to new challenges while maintaining its essential character and values. The digital revolution has fundamentally transformed how Geneva operates as a centre for international cooperation, yet the city's core mission remains remarkably consistent with traditions established centuries ago. Modern diplomatic negotiations increasingly rely on secure digital communications, real-time data sharing, and virtual participation that would have seemed magical to earlier generations of diplomats. However, the fundamental challenge of building trust between parties with competing interests continues to require the kind of face-to-face engagement that Geneva has always facilitated. Geneva's adaptation to digital diplomacy accelerated dramatically during the COVID-19 pandemic, when travel restrictions forced international organizations to conduct essential business through video conferences and online platforms. The World Health Organization coordinated global pandemic responses through digital channels, while trade negotiators at the World Trade Organization maintained complex multilateral discussions via secure video links. These experiences demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of virtual diplomacy. The the city's international organizations discovered that certain types of diplomatic activities translated surprisingly well to digital formats. Technical working groups could share documents more efficiently online, while large plenary sessions could accommodate broader participation when geographic constraints were removed. However, the informal conversations that often prove crucial for resolving difficult disputes remain challenging to replicate in virtual environments. Geneva's response to these challenges has involved developing hybrid approaches that combine digital efficiency with in-person engagement when circumstances permit. Conference facilities have been redesigned to support seamless integration of remote and physical participants, while new protocols have been developed to ensure that virtual participants can contribute meaningfully to discussions rather than simply observing proceedings. The democratizing potential of digital participation has created new opportunities for broader engagement in international negotiations. Civil society organizations that previously couldn't afford to maintain permanent representation in Geneva can now participate regularly in relevant discussions through virtual platforms. Academic experts from universities around the world can contribute specialized knowledge to technical working groups without the expense and time commitment of travel. However, these expanded opportunities have also created new challenges for managing complex multilateral processes. The number of potential participants in any given negotiation has increased exponentially, requiring sophisticated systems for organizing input and maintaining focus on achieving concrete results. Geneva's institutional community has pioneered new approaches to stakeholder management that attempt to balance inclusive participation with effective decision-making. The cybersecurity implications of conducting sensitive international negotiations through digital channels have required Geneva to develop new forms of technical expertise alongside traditional diplomatic skills. Protecting confidential discussions from surveillance or interference demands sophisticated security measures that must be balanced against the transparency and accessibility that make international cooperation possible. Geneva's role in internet governance has expanded beyond hosting technical discussions to include broader questions about how digital technologies affect international relations. The concentration of international organizations in the city creates natural opportunities for addressing the intersection between cybersecurity, human rights, economic development, and traditional diplomatic concerns in integrated ways that might be difficult to achieve elsewhere. Artificial intelligence is beginning to influence diplomatic processes in Geneva in ways that extend far beyond simple automation of routine tasks. Machine learning algorithms can analyze vast amounts of treaty language to identify potential conflicts or gaps in international law, while natural language processing can facilitate real-time translation between multiple languages during complex negotiations. The ethical implications of using AI in diplomatic contexts have become subjects of discussion within Geneva's international organizations. Questions about algorithmic bias, transparency in automated decision-making, and the role of human judgment in international negotiations all require careful consideration as these technologies become more sophisticated and widely adopted. Geneva's educational institutions have expanded their programs to address the growing need for diplomats and international civil servants who understand both traditional diplomatic practices and emerging technological challenges. The Graduate Institute now offers specialized courses on digital diplomacy, while various professional development programs help experienced practitioners adapt to changing technological environments. The emergence of space commerce has created entirely new categories of international disputes that require resolution through institutions based in Geneva. Satellite communications, orbital debris management, and asteroid mining rights all involve questions of international law that must be addressed through multilateral negotiations. The International Telecommunication Union's work on managing radio frequency allocations has become crucial for coordinating the growing number of commercial satellites that provide global communication services. Climate change continues to drive innovation in Geneva's approach to international cooperation, as the urgency of the challenge requires new forms of coordination between different types of organizations. Environmental negotiations must integrate scientific research, economic analysis, and humanitarian concerns in ways that transcend traditional organizational boundaries. Geneva's concentration of diverse international organizations creates opportunities for this kind of integrated approach while highlighting continuing challenges in achieving effective coordination. The youth climate movement has brought new energy and perspectives to environmental negotiations in Geneva, while challenging traditional diplomatic protocols. Young activists have demanded more direct participation in discussions that will profoundly affect their futures, leading to innovative procedures for incorporating youth voices into formal negotiation processes. Financial technology innovations like blockchain and digital currencies are creating new regulatory challenges that require international coordination through institutions based in Geneva. The Bank for International Settlements regularly hosts discussions among central bankers about how to address the monetary policy implications of these technologies, while other organizations work on preventing their use for illicit activities. The increasing importance of data as an economic asset has created new forms of international competition and cooperation that require diplomatic attention. Questions about cross-border data flows, digital taxation, and technology transfer all involve issues that must be addressed through international negotiations, combining technical expertise with traditional diplomatic skills. Geneva's role in international arbitration has expanded to include new types of disputes arising from digital commerce, intellectual property in virtual environments, and cross-border data processing. The World Intellectual Property Organization's arbitration services now handle cases involving domain names, software licensing, and digital content distribution that would have been inconceivable just decades ago. The rise of cryptocurrency has created new opportunities for circumventing traditional financial sanctions and regulatory oversight, requiring enhanced cooperation between law enforcement agencies that often meet in Geneva's neutral environment. The city's tradition of facilitating sensitive security cooperation has proved valuable for addressing these emerging challenges while respecting different nations' sovereignty and legal systems. Biotechnology developments continue to create ethical and regulatory challenges that require international coordination through Geneva-based organizations. Gene editing technologies, synthetic biology, and personalized medicine all raise questions about safety, equity, and human dignity that transcend national boundaries and require multilateral approaches. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of international coordination in biotechnology regulation, while revealing significant gaps in existing governance systems. Geneva's health organizations are working to develop new approaches to pandemic preparedness that combine scientific research, regulatory oversight, and diplomatic coordination in more effective ways. Migration patterns continue to evolve in response to climate change, economic opportunities, and political instability, creating new challenges for international coordination through Geneva-based organizations. The International Organization for Migration has developed innovative approaches to managing both forced displacement and voluntary migration flows while addressing the concerns of both origin and destination countries. The increasing recognition of climate migration as a distinct category requiring special international attention has led to new forms of cooperation that combine environmental protection, humanitarian assistance, and development programming. Geneva's concentration of organizations working on different aspects of these challenges enables integrated approaches that address root causes as well as immediate needs. Cultural heritage protection has emerged as another area where Geneva's international organisations play crucial roles in facilitating cooperation. Armed conflicts, natural disasters, and development pressures all threaten cultural sites and traditions that represent irreplaceable human heritage. UNESCO's work in this area requires diplomatic skills as well as technical expertise in archaeology, conservation, and cultural anthropology. The digitization of cultural heritage has created new opportunities for preservation and access, while raising questions about ownership, authenticity, and cultural appropriation that require international dialogue. Geneva's experience in managing complex intellectual property issues provides valuable precedents for addressing these emerging challenges. Sports governance continues to provide interesting examples of how international cooperation operates in Geneva's institutional environment. Anti-doping efforts require coordination between law enforcement agencies, scientific laboratories, and sports organisations across multiple countries, while major sporting events create diplomatic opportunities and challenges that extend far beyond athletic competition. The increasing commercialisation of international sports has created new forms of disputes requiring neutral arbitration services that Geneva is well positioned to provide. The Court of Arbitration for Sport, while based in Lausanne, relies heavily on Geneva's legal expertise and neutral environment for resolving complex international disputes. Geneva's role in managing international standards development has expanded dramatically as globalization creates demands for technical compatibility across national boundaries. Everything from telecommunications protocols to food safety standards requires international coordination that combines technical expertise with diplomatic negotiation skills. The emergence of new technologies often outpaces existing regulatory frameworks, requiring rapid development of international standards through processes that Geneva has pioneered. The challenge of balancing innovation, incentives with safety and security concerns requires diplomatic skills as well as technical knowledge. Labour rights protection continues to evolve through the International Labour Organization's work in Geneva as new forms of employment emerge in the digital economy. Platform work, remote employment, and artificial intelligence automation all create challenges for traditional approaches to worker protection that require innovative international cooperation. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated trends toward remote work that have implications for international labour law, taxation, and social protection systems. Geneva's labour organisations are developing new approaches to these challenges that attempt to protect workers while accommodating the flexibility that modern economies require. Gender equality initiatives in Geneva have expanded beyond traditional diplomatic representation to address substantive questions about how international institutions can better serve women's interests globally. The increasing participation of women in senior diplomatic positions has influenced both the style and substance of international negotiations. The Me Too movement has prompted Geneva's international organisations to examine their own workplace cultures while developing new approaches to addressing gender-based violence and discrimination through international cooperation. These efforts illustrate how social movements can influence institutional practices in international organisations. Indigenous peoples' rights have gained increasing attention in Geneva as international organisations recognise the importance of traditional knowledge for addressing global challenges like climate change and biodiversity conservation. The United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues provides a platform for Indigenous voices in international policy discussions while developing new approaches to protecting traditional territories and cultural practices. The intersection between Indigenous rights and environmental protection has created new forms of cooperation that combine traditional ecological knowledge with scientific research and policy advocacy. Geneva's experience in managing diverse stakeholder participation has proved valuable for facilitating these complex relationships. Disability rights advocacy has evolved significantly in Geneva since the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which has influenced how international organizations design their facilities, procedures, and programs. The principle of universal accessibility has implications that extend far beyond physical accommodations to include communication methods, participation procedures, and policy priorities. The increasing recognition that disability perspectives can enhance rather than complicate international cooperation has led to innovative approaches that benefit all participants. Geneva's experience in implementing these changes provides models for other international centres facing similar challenges. Mental health has emerged as a significant concern for diplomatic personnel working in high-stress environments that often involve exposure to human suffering and political conflict. Geneva's international organisations have pioneered employee assistance programs that address the psychological challenges of international service while maintaining the professional standards essential for effective diplomacy. The destigmatization of mental health concerns has enabled more open discussion of the emotional toll that international humanitarian and diplomatic work can exact on practitioners. Geneva's approach to supporting staff wellness while maintaining operational effectiveness provides models for other international organizations. Aging populations in developed countries are creating new demands for international cooperation on social protection, healthcare, and economic support systems. Geneva's experience in facilitating discussions about complex social policy issues has proved valuable for addressing these demographic challenges that transcend national boundaries. The implications of population aging for international migration patterns, economic development, and social stability all require diplomatic attention that combines demographic analysis with policy coordination. Geneva's institutional capacity enables integrated approaches to these interconnected challenges. Youth engagement in international affairs has evolved beyond traditional model UN programs to include meaningful participation in policy discussions that will affect young people's futures. Geneva's international organizations have developed innovative approaches to incorporating youth perspectives while maintaining the structured character necessary for effective decision-making. The digital nativity of younger generations has influenced how Geneva's institutions communicate with broader publics while creating opportunities for more direct engagement with global audiences. Social media strategies, online consultation processes, and virtual participation options all reflect efforts to make international cooperation more accessible and transparent. Educational exchange programs based in Geneva continue to evolve as globalization creates demands for internationally minded professionals who understand both technical specializations and cross-cultural cooperation. The city's concentration of international organizations provides unparalleled opportunities for experiential learning in international affairs. The increasing importance of cultural competence in international cooperation has influenced how Geneva's educational institutions prepare students for careers in global governance. Language training, cultural immersion experiences, and interdisciplinary approaches all reflect recognition that technical expertise must be combined with sophisticated understanding of human differences. Geneva's approach to managing religious diversity illustrates broader principles that apply to international cooperation more generally. The city hosts communities representing virtually every major religious tradition, while maintaining secular governance structures that respect religious freedom without privileging any particular faith. The role of religious organizations in international humanitarian work has created new forms of cooperation that combine faith-based motivations with professional standards and secular accountability mechanisms. Geneva's experience in facilitating these relationships provides models for other contexts where religious and secular actors must collaborate effectively. Interfaith dialogue initiatives in Geneva have contributed to broader efforts to prevent religious conflicts while promoting mutual understanding across cultural boundaries. These activities complement formal diplomatic efforts while building the personal relationships that often prove crucial for resolving political disputes. Environmental activism has evolved significantly in Geneva as climate change has created new urgency around environmental protection, while raising questions about how civil society organizations can most effectively influence international policy. The city's procedures for stakeholder participation have adapted to accommodate more assertive forms of advocacy while maintaining orderly decision-making processes. The tension between urgent environmental needs and deliberate diplomatic processes has required innovation in how Geneva's institutions balance scientific evidence, political feasibility, and activist pressure. These experiments in accelerated diplomacy may provide models for addressing other urgent global challenges. Geneva's cultural institutions have become increasingly important for supporting the city's international mission by providing venues for informal diplomacy and cross-cultural exchange. Museums, theatres, and concert halls all contribute to creating an atmosphere of international understanding that supports formal diplomatic activities. The role of cultural diplomacy in building relationships that enable substantive cooperation continues to evolve as digital technologies create new forms of cultural exchange, while traditional forms of artistic collaboration remain important for building personal connections between people from different backgrounds. Food culture represents another dimension of Geneva's international character that contributes to the city's effectiveness as a diplomatic centre. Restaurants serving authentic cuisine from around the world provide familiar comfort for international visitors while creating opportunities for cultural exchange that complement formal diplomatic activities. The growing attention to sustainable food systems and agricultural practices has created new areas for international cooperation that combine environmental protection, economic development, and cultural preservation concerns. Geneva's experience in managing complex multilateral issues has proved valuable for addressing these interconnected challenges. Transportation infrastructure continues to evolve in Geneva as the city adapts to serve growing numbers of international visitors while reducing environmental impacts. The expansion of public transit systems, bicycle infrastructure, and pedestrian facilities all reflect efforts to maintain accessibility while promoting sustainability. The challenge of managing airport security for diplomatic travel illustrates broader tensions between security concerns and the openness that makes international cooperation possible. Geneva's approach to balancing these competing needs provides models for other international centres facing similar challenges. Housing availability represents an ongoing challenge for Geneva, as international organisations require housing for staff, while local communities face pressure from global real estate markets. The city's approach to managing these competing demands illustrates broader questions about how international centres can maintain their essential character while serving global functions. The gentrification pressures created by international organisations and global businesses require careful management to preserve the local communities that contribute to Geneva's unique character. Policies that protect affordable housing while accommodating international needs reflect broader challenges facing global cities. Language policy in Geneva continues to evolve as the international community becomes more linguistically diverse, while practical constraints limit the number of languages that can be accommodated in formal proceedings. The city's approach to managing multilingual communication provides models for other international centres facing similar challenges. The role of English as a lingua franca in international diplomacy has implications for how other languages are preserved and promoted in international contexts. Geneva's experience in maintaining linguistic diversity while ensuring effective communication illustrates principles that apply broadly to international cooperation. Technology transfer initiatives based in Geneva illustrate how international organizations can facilitate the sharing of innovations while respecting intellectual property rights and addressing concerns about technological dependence. The World Intellectual Property Organization's work in this area requires balancing innovation, incentives with development needs. The increasing importance of technology in addressing global challenges has created new demands for international cooperation that combines technical expertise with diplomatic skills. Geneva's institutional capacity enables integrated approaches that address both technical and political dimensions of technology governance. Public health emergency preparedness has become a major focus for Geneva's international organizations following lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. New approaches to international coordination attempt to balance respect for national sovereignty with the need for rapid response to threats that transcend borders. The challenge of maintaining public trust in international health institutions while addressing legitimate concerns about national autonomy requires diplomatic skills as well as technical expertise. Geneva's experience in managing complex stakeholder relationships provides valuable resources for addressing these challenges. Humanitarian financing continues to evolve as traditional donor countries face domestic pressures while humanitarian needs expand globally. Geneva's role in coordinating international humanitarian assistance requires innovative approaches to resource mobilization that combine public funding with private sector engagement. The increasing complexity of humanitarian emergencies that combine natural disasters, armed conflict, and economic collapse requires integrated responses that transcend traditional organizational boundaries. Geneva's concentration of humanitarian organizations enables coordination that would be difficult to achieve elsewhere. Peacekeeping operations continue to evolve as conflicts become more complex and international interventions face increased scrutiny regarding their effectiveness and legitimacy. Geneva's role in developing peacekeeping doctrines and training programs reflects broader efforts to improve international responses to armed conflict. The increasing participation of women in peacekeeping operations has influenced both operational procedures and strategic approaches to conflict resolution. Geneva's experience in implementing gender mainstreaming policies provides models for other international institutions addressing similar challenges. Transitional justice mechanisms have become increasingly important as post-conflict societies seek to address legacies of human rights violations while building sustainable peace. Geneva's expertise in international law and human rights provides valuable resources for developing innovative approaches to accountability and reconciliation. The role of truth and reconciliation processes in preventing the recurrence of conflicts requires understanding both legal principles and cultural practices that vary significantly across different societies. Geneva's experience in managing cultural diversity enables sensitive approaches to these challenges. Arms control verification continues to evolve as new technologies create both opportunities for more effective monitoring and challenges for traditional verification methods. Geneva's role in developing verification protocols requires combining technical expertise with diplomatic negotiation skills. The emergence of autonomous weapons systems has created new categories of arms control challenges that require international cooperation to address effectively. Geneva's experience in developing international humanitarian law provides important precedents for addressing these emerging threats. Nuclear disarmament remains a central concern for Geneva's diplomatic community as new nuclear powers emerge, while existing arsenals require ongoing management and eventual elimination. The city's role in facilitating disarmament discussions requires balancing idealistic goals with pragmatic constraints imposed by security concerns. The relationship between nuclear disarmament and peaceful nuclear energy development creates complex technical and political challenges that require sustained diplomatic attention. Geneva's institutional capacity enables comprehensive approaches that address multiple dimensions of nuclear governance simultaneously. Counter-terrorism cooperation continues to evolve through Geneva's institutions as new threats emerge, while concerns about human rights protection require careful balance between security and liberty. The city's tradition of facilitating sensitive security cooperation provides frameworks for addressing these challenges. The role of international law in defining terrorism and establishing appropriate responses requires ongoing development as terrorist tactics evolve and new actors emerge. Geneva's expertise in international legal development provides valuable resources for addressing these definitional and practical challenges. Human trafficking prevention represents another area where Geneva's international organizations facilitate cooperation between law enforcement agencies, humanitarian organizations, and development programs. The complexity of trafficking networks requires integrated responses that address both immediate victim protection and underlying causes. The intersection between trafficking and migration requires careful attention to ensure that anti-trafficking efforts don't inadvertently harm legitimate migrants or refugees. Geneva's experience in managing these complex relationships provides models for other contexts facing similar challenges. Corruption prevention has become an increasingly important focus for international cooperation as globalization creates new opportunities for cross-border corruption, while democratic governance requires transparent and accountable institutions. Geneva's role in developing anti-corruption standards requires combining legal expertise with practical understanding of governance challenges. The relationship between corruption and other global challenges like environmental degradation, human trafficking, and armed conflict requires integrated approaches that address multiple issues simultaneously. Geneva's institutional capacity enables comprehensive responses that might be difficult to coordinate elsewhere. Geneva's story continues to unfold as new challenges emerge and established institutions adapt to changing global conditions. The city's 8 centuries of experience in international cooperation provide both inspiration and practical guidance for addressing contemporary challenges, while suggesting that effective global governance requires sustained commitment to the patient work of building understanding across cultural and political differences. The future will undoubtedly bring challenges that today's diplomats cannot fully anticipate, but Geneva's demonstrated capacity for adaptation while maintaining essential values suggests that the city will continue to serve humanity's ongoing efforts to govern itself collectively and peacefully. The transformation of global communication networks during the early 21st century created unprecedented opportunities for Geneva's diplomatic community, while fundamentally altering how international cooperation operates. Social media platforms enabled real-time communication between negotiators and their home governments, but they also exposed diplomatic processes to public scrutiny that could complicate sensitive negotiations. Geneva's institutions developed new protocols for managing information flows that balance transparency with the confidentiality essential for productive dialogue. The rise of citizen journalism and instant global communication meant that diplomatic developments in Geneva could influence public opinion worldwide within hours of occurring. This acceleration of information flows required diplomats to consider domestic political reactions in multiple countries simultaneously while maintaining focus on achieving substantive agreements. The city's experience in managing complex stakeholder relationships proved valuable for navigating these new communication challenges. Disinformation campaigns targeting international negotiations created new security concerns that required Geneva's institutions to develop sophisticated approaches to protecting the integrity of diplomatic processes. The challenge of distinguishing legitimate public interest from the deliberate manipulation required new forms of expertise that combined traditional diplomatic skills with understanding of digital media dynamics. Geneva's role in standard setting for emerging technologies expanded dramatically as artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and quantum computing created regulatory challenges that transcended national boundaries. The International Organization for Standardization, while not headquartered in Geneva, maintained significant operations in the city and relied on its neutral environment for developing technical standards that could gain global acceptance. The increasing importance of data governance in international relations created new forms of diplomatic activity that combined highly technical discussions with fundamental questions about privacy, sovereignty, and economic competition. Geneva's experience in managing complex multilateral negotiations proved essential for addressing these challenges that required both technical expertise and political sensitivity. Quantum computing developments raised particular concerns about cybersecurity and cryptographic systems that protect sensitive diplomatic communications. Geneva's institutions found themselves at the center of discussions about how to maintain secure international communication as quantum technologies threaten to make current encryption methods obsolete. The emergence of central bank digital currencies created new challenges for international monetary cooperation that required coordination through institutions with significant Geneva connections. Questions about cross-border payments, monetary sovereignty, and financial stability all required diplomatic attention that combined technical understanding with appreciation for political constraints facing different governments. Blockchain technology applications beyond cryptocurrency created opportunities for improving transparency and accountability in international cooperation, while raising questions about governance and control that required careful diplomatic consideration. Geneva's experience in managing complex technical issues with political implications proved valuable for addressing these emerging challenges. Space debris management became an increasingly urgent international concern as commercial space activities expanded rapidly without adequate coordination mechanisms. Geneva's expertise in managing global commons issues provided important precedents for developing governance frameworks for orbital space that could accommodate both commercial activities and scientific research while ensuring long-term sustainability. The militarization of space created new arms control challenges that required Geneva's disarmament community to extend traditional concepts of weapons control to entirely new domains. The challenge of defining weapons in space environments while preserving legitimate scientific and commercial activities required innovative approaches to international law development. Geoengineering proposals for addressing climate change created new categories of international governance challenges that combined environmental protection with sovereignty concerns and intergenerational justice considerations. Geneva's climate institutions found themselves addressing technologies that could potentially affect weather patterns globally, while raising fundamental questions about who had authority to make such decisions. The intersection between climate engineering and international security created additional complexity, as some geoengineering proposals could potentially be used as weapons, while others might create conflicts over unequal effects on different regions. Geneva's experience in managing dual-use technology issues provided valuable precedents for addressing these challenges. Ocean governance expanded beyond traditional fisheries management to include deep-sea mining, plastic pollution, and marine geoengineering that required new forms of international cooperation. Geneva's maritime organizations developed innovative approaches that combined environmental protection with economic development concerns while addressing the rights of coastal communities dependent on marine resources. The discovery of vast mineral resources in international waters created new opportunities for economic development while raising questions about equitable sharing of benefits and environmental protection. Geneva's experience in managing resource allocation disputes provided frameworks for addressing these emerging challenges. Arctic governance became increasingly important as climate change opened new shipping routes and resource extraction opportunities, while creating environmental and security challenges that required international coordination. Geneva's institutions provided neutral venues for discussions between Arctic and non-Arctic nations about access rights and environmental protection obligations. The increasing importance of indigenous knowledge in environmental and climate research created new opportunities for traditional communities to participate in international policy discussions while raising questions about intellectual property protection and cultural appropriation. Geneva's experience in managing cultural diversity enabled sensitive approaches to these complex relationships. Pandemic preparedness initiatives expanded significantly following COVID-19 experiences, with Geneva's health organizations developing new approaches to international coordination that attempted to balance rapid response capabilities with respect for national sovereignty. The challenge of maintaining public trust while enabling effective international cooperation required innovative diplomatic approaches. Vaccine diplomacy emerged as a distinct category of international relations as countries used vaccine distribution to advance foreign policy objectives, while humanitarian organizations worked to ensure equitable access based on medical needs. Geneva's experience in managing competing political and humanitarian concerns proved valuable for addressing these challenges. Mental health governance gained increasing attention as global stresses created mental health challenges that transcended national boundaries, while cultural differences in understanding mental illness required sensitive international approaches. Geneva's health institutions developed new frameworks for cooperation that respected cultural diversity while promoting evidence-based treatments. The intersection between mental health and conflict prevention created new opportunities for international cooperation, as research demonstrated connections between psychological trauma and political violence. Geneva's peace-building expertise enabled integrated approaches that addressed both individual healing and social reconciliation. Digital rights protection emerged as a major focus for Geneva's human rights organizations, as digital technologies created new forms of surveillance, discrimination, and exclusion, while offering unprecedented opportunities for communication and organization. The challenge of protecting privacy and expression rights while enabling legitimate security and commercial activities required careful balance. The global digital divide created new forms of inequality that required international cooperation to address effectively, while raising questions about technology transfer, infrastructure development, and capacity building. Geneva's development organizations pioneered approaches that combined technical assistance with human rights protection. Artificial intelligence governance discussions in Geneva addressed both immediate regulatory needs and longer-term questions about how AI might transform international relations and global governance. The possibility that AI could enhance diplomatic communication and analysis while potentially disrupting traditional decision-making processes required careful consideration. The development of artificial general intelligence created existential questions that required international cooperation, despite enormous uncertainty about timelines and capabilities. Geneva's experience in managing complex future-oriented challenges provided frameworks for addressing these unprecedented concerns. Biotechnology regulation continued evolving as gene editing, synthetic biology, and personalized medicine created new therapeutic possibilities while raising concerns about safety, equity, and human enhancement. Geneva's health organizations balanced innovation promotion with precautionary approaches that protected public safety. The emergence of biological weapons concerns related to dual-use biotechnology research required Geneva's disarmament community to develop new approaches to arms control that could address rapidly evolving threats while preserving legitimate scientific research. The challenge of monitoring biological research without stifling innovation required innovative verification methods. As we reach the end of our journey through Geneva's remarkable history, we can see how this small Swiss city became something far greater than the sum of its parts. From Roman trading post to medieval sanctuary, from Calvin's refuge to the world's diplomatic capital, Geneva has repeatedly demonstrated that geography alone doesn't create greatness. What matters is the accumulated wisdom of generations who understood that humanity's greatest challenges require patient cooperation across the deepest divides. Today, as we face unprecedented global threats that no single nation can address alone, Geneva's 8 centuries of diplomatic innovation remind us that peace isn't just the absence of war, it's the presence of institutions, traditions, and relationships that make cooperation possible, even when it seems impossible. The next time you hear about international negotiations, climate agreements, or humanitarian relief efforts, remember that small lakeside city where handshakes still prevent wars and signatures still save lives.